Hello and welcome back. I'm Dr. Marc D. Baldwin, and this is lecture number 4 for ENC 1102. Today we're going to go into greater detail about literary criticism. First, I'll caution you regarding exactly how and how not to use reader response to write your analytical essays. Then I'll briefly go over 3 other critical approaches: historical, sociological, which comes in 2 forms, domestic and Marxist, and psychological. We'll wind it up today by discussing modernism and existentialism, 2 isms that particularly apply to and illuminate all the short stories we'll be reading. As I indicated several times in the last lecture, reader response criticism is a good place to start, but don't base your entire analytical approach upon it. Use it to find an angle on the story and to get you engaged and looking for a fresh thesis. Your essay, however, is not a touchy-feely reading of why you like or dislike the story and how it relates to or differs from your own life experiences. In other words, the essay is not all about your feelings and your life. Critical theories are tools, and we must know how to use and control our tools. The tool of reader response is subjective, and thus is best used in conjunction with a more objective critical approach, such as the historical, sociological, or psychological. Find your angle by tracing your responses, your gut reactions. Then sharpen your angle by attaching it to actualities in the text and its context. Your thesis, thus, should be such that you can develop it with specific evidence from the story, supplemented by a researched angle. For example, in Soldier's Home, you might devise a thesis regarding post-traumatic stress syndrome, or some aspect of World War I, or various religious viewpoints espoused in the story, or the psychological conditions of repression or alienation, or some characteristic of modernism or existentialism. As I said a moment ago, 3 other critical approaches worth noting and perhaps employing in your analysis are the historical, sociological, and psychological. Historical criticism is just that, analyzing the actual historical facts and conditions manifested in the text. Historical criticism often examines the cause and effect of large events upon ordinary people, or vice versa. The machinations of power, the winds of fate, chance, the feeling of helplessness or hopelessness, and the tension between free will and determinism are all corollary topics of a historically informed analysis. For Soldier's Home, you might examine Krebs's Midwestern Christian upbringing, or World War I and its pervasive effect upon the story and Krebs. Sociological criticism, the domestic variety, examines the various forces, fashions, attitudes, and relationships in society. The sociological approach attempts to ascertain the reasons for and implications of various particular characteristics of people's behavior in their environment, town, or family. A particularly radical branch of sociological criticism is Marxist criticism, which analyzes class and power structures. Marxists contend that capitalism subordinates and enslaves people to a system that strips them of dignity and alienates them from both others and themselves, their own true natures. Marxists believe that socialism, state-owned means of production, is better than capitalism, but pure communism, in which the people own everything equally, is the best system of all. In Soldier's Home, you might compare and contrast the 2 worlds that Krebs has known, the home one of peace and innocence, as opposed to the foreign one of war and experience. Or you might delve into the Netherland of Marxism, examining class and power structures at war for Krebs's soul. Psychological criticism examines the unconscious motives and fantasies of the author and/or his characters. In basic terms, a psychological analysis looks at what the characters want and what they lack, what motivates them and why. Freud's theories on human sexuality and the ego, id, and superego are fruitful tools to apply to literature, as are Jung's ideas about the collective unconscious. In Soldier's Home, Krebs is a psychoanalyst's dream come true. He's a mass of conflicting emotions and contradictory impulses, all at the mercy of the outside world, other people, and his parents. Kind of like you and me. Thoroughly human and fascinatingly complex. The analytical possibilities for dissecting Krebs are limitless. Of course, there are other literary theories, schools, and approaches. Naturalism studies the dynamics among nature, fate, and human nature. Realism questions the entire idea of reality, perspective, and artistic representation. Social Darwinism applies the scientists' ideas of natural selection and survival of the fittest to literature. Feminism examines literature through the lens of a woman, positing that men have written a world in their image and to their benefit. Deconstruction takes a text apart, tracing its origins and unintentional meanings. There are also numerous other theories and approaches. Should you care to deploy any of these, please research and thoroughly familiarize yourself with them. Let's talk now about modernism and existentialism. Often when we come to a work of art, it helps to know some of the rudimentary aspects of the artist's influences and context, the artistic school of thought that contains and influences the artist, where the artist is coming from, so to speak. Well, Hemingway and the other authors we're studying are, to one degree or another, modernists and existentialists. Modernism is characterized by, number one, a rebellious spirit. The Victorian world was no longer. The old values were gone or exposed as false or hypocritical, and so the feeling was that new values must be created. Number two, the influence of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He scorned the idea of getting at truth, believing that there is no truth, no reality, no absolute. All is relative and a matter of individual perception. He believed in undecidables in life, language, and art. The third characteristic of modernism is decadence, which occurs when a form of something, art, lifestyle, fashion, civilization, government, etc., has gone as far as it can, and no one can think of another direction. Decadence stresses the invalidity of structure, believing that there can be no such thing as a coherent, truly workable design in nature or society. Thus, revolution happens. The fourth characteristic of modernism is its romantic legacy. Romanticism is concerned with the commonplace, with natural, simple material. It seeks to find the absolute by transcending the actual. It's ironic that the modernists, like realists, are drawn to the concrete and immediate, but like romanticists, they search for the ideal. Self-consciousness, self-reliance, and the imagination's power to create are almost obsessions of romanticism. The fifth characteristic of modernism was its radically new notions regarding the nature of consciousness. Freud and Jung posited that consciousness is multiple, that the past is always present in coloring one's present reaction, and that man is his memories. In literature, these ideas were manifested in Faulkner's stream of consciousness and Hemingway's iceberg principle. A new kind of reality developed, one preoccupied with the inner life, the subjective. The sixth characteristic of modernism was a new view of time. Time was seen not as a series of chronological moments in sequence, but as a continuous flow in the consciousness of the individual, with the already merging into the not yet. And number 7, modernism also attacked the English system of utilitarianism, which held that the value of an action or law or thing is measured according to how much pleasure it provides for the most people. This philosophy undergirds the democratic idea of the pursuit of happiness. It was the dominant 19th century political and social formula. Modernism says quite simply that happiness cannot be pursued, that when you seek it, you aren't really living. Some themes in modernist literature include the breakdown of moral relationships, the radical dehumanization of the individual, the disillusionment of war, and a feeling of hopelessness about politics and society, which led to alienation and romantic individualism. As a result, individuals had to construct their own private code of ethics to combat the feeling of rootlessness, emptiness, and sterility. 3 more themes of modernist literature are a pervasive sense of disillusionment as a result of the incongruity between the expected and the real, or actuality and the ideal, the collapse in the belief in God and religion, which also led to man's alienation from nature and ideals, and an obsession with the self, to the point that it was believed by many that God and death are, quote, actually states of ourselves that we've externalized in order to simplify our existence, as the poet Rilke posited. It was a constant fight to keep the self intact and safe from demoralization. The 5 elements of existentialism are, number 1, the predominance of the absurd. Existentialists believe that there is nothing lasting or real, no absolutes, no final purpose, or anything worth any effort. Individuals exist in a state of isolation and frustration. Number 2, the individual's focus should be on just being. Truth resides in striving toward, in becoming. People attain meaning in their lives not in stasis, but rather in flux. Change enervates, movement defines. Existentialists believe that people must face the dread of existence, popularly known as angst, the German word for anxiety or anguish. Dread is an awareness that anything is possible, that insecurity is infinite. If accepted, dread destroys all faith in finite ends and prepares the individual for the infinite faith of positive nothingness. The 4th characteristic of existentialism is that the existentialist must make conscious choices. Only through choosing do we define and construct our individuality. One must choose, not drift. By choosing, we become new selves. When the absurdity of life is recognized, the dread converted, the choice made, and responsibility assumed, existence is felt as a value in itself. Finally, the existentialist must make a commitment. Effort and accomplishment become the reasons to exist. This idea is Sartre's doctrine of engagement. Talk is cheap. There is no individual reality except in deeds and actions. I love Sartre's wonderfully paradoxical maxim, freedom is responsibility. Mull that one over a while. Okay, so what do we do now? Think over the critical approaches. Research the ones that appeal to you, and be reading the short stories, applying the material from this lecture. In the next lecture, I'm going to employ Soldier's Home as a laboratory specimen, showing how much of what we've discussed so far applies in a hands-on dissection. We'll read several passages of Soldier's Home together, make lots of observations about its modern and existential elements, as well as many other aspects, and assemble a long list of topics and elements, identifying and analyzing its many artistic virtues. So thanks for your attention, and I'll see you next time.